Right now seems like a great time to think about Cardano in its proper historical context. Among other things, Cardano added smart contracts to UTxO, and as such is the spiritual successor to Bitcoin. And just like Bitcoin once did, Cardano now finds itself in the situation where virtually everyone is sleeping on its relevance. When I first got into Bitcoin around a decade ago, few people had heard of it, and many of those who knew of it immediately dismissed it as having no real utility. Why Bitcoin when you have fiat? In 2023, a lot of crypto people are asking, why Cardano when you have Ethereum? Just like with Bitcoin a decade ago, they're sleeping on the actual utility added by technological progress. But lucky for us in Cardano, that progress keeps going even if they won't understand it until it's already passed them by. Ready? Let's go. Today, we are going to discuss why Cardano is actually the biggest DeFi dApp in all of crypto, and why it also may be the only one that could mount a robust defense to the regulatory hammer. A good but sad security reminder, and concentrated liquidity pools coming soon to Cardano. If you take one look at this image and you're more worried that five fully clothed people all asleep in one spot like this may be more the product of a gas leak than of peaceful slumber, or if you're finding value in these videos each weekday, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. A decade ago, people didn't understand Bitcoin because they didn't really understand the problems that Bitcoin was addressing. The only game in town for a long time had been to accumulate value in fiat. People weren't really thinking about the detriments of having this infinitely inflatable money supply that central banks could manipulate. Sure, some people were. People who were involved in the Cyprus financial crisis and the collapse of certain currencies in various nation states around the world. Those people understood the problem all too well. But people in jurisdictions where these kinds of things had not occurred didn't really understand the problem with normal fiat currency. So because they didn't really understand the problem, they didn't appreciate the burdens that were being foisted upon them by those monetary regimes. Of course, they weren't going to understand Bitcoin. A decade ago, everybody was sleeping on Bitcoin. Today, in 2023, everyone's sleeping on Cardano. And there are a lot of parallels here. For a lot of years, the only game in town in crypto has been Ethereum. And just like with fiat monetary regimes, people have gotten used to the Ethereum framework. They've gotten used to the burdens foisted upon them by the way things work in Ethereum. Ethereum has been the only game in town, and they've just sort of gotten used to the rules of that game. So when something like Cardano comes along and the same limitations don't apply, people don't even understand the benefit because they didn't realize that those things were a problem to begin with. Here, Adewell points out a great example. He says, gonna keep harping on it, but once you get Cardano staking is the biggest DeFi app in all of crypto at 8.9 billion. Perspectives on all they've told you about Cardano should shift pretty rapidly. Game on for the newer Cardano dApps to steal some market share, top three this bull run. He follows that up with largest decentralized finance app is 7.9 billion in a centralized financial custodian focusing on staking, not listed in the decentralized finance rankings. 8.9 billion in a decentralized non-custodial staking protocol. And what he's pointing out here is that you've got these DeFi rankings, and the metric in DeFi ranking is always total value locked. It's total value locked because the way the game worked always in Ethereum and all the other protocols that were kind of the norm, that kind of blockchains, at least, they all kind of looked exactly like Ethereum, and they all sort of worked exactly like Ethereum. The name of the game was always that if you wanted to participate in a lot of these various use cases in DeFi, you had to lock your assets in some kind of a smart contract. That was just the way it worked. People sort of accepted it because that was the only game that was available to play. There was no other game with different rules, so nobody even thought about what these kinds of use cases, platforms addressing these use cases would look like if those same rules didn't apply, which is why you don't see something like a Cardano staking system listed in the DeFi rankings, because the metric in those rankings is TVL. And what is the one maybe paramount goal in the Cardano staking architecture? That's that you get to keep custody of your assets. There is no locking your assets. It's true liquid staking, something that can't even exist in Ethereum, like we covered in the last video. You can achieve some level of liquidity in a derivative that represents your staking position, but you can't be allowed to have any liquidity in your actual ether that you're trying to stake in Ethereum. They won't allow you to have that. You have to lock your ether in the stake pool. You have to give up custody. This is just sort of a premise that exists throughout Ethereum DeFi and all the rest of DeFi that seems to resemble Ethereum DeFi so strongly. The premise is always that you must give up custody. Then Cardano comes along and Cardano says, hey, why don't we do the same thing but not make people give up custody, at least with our staking system? And lo and behold, there's more, there are more assets involved in our staking system than any other DeFi dApp in all of crypto. If you want to validate that 8.9 billion number, here's how you get here. Here's the amount of ADA currently out there floating around in the ecosystem. Obviously, our max supply is 45 billion, but not all of that is issued yet. It gets issued as a block reward for every block that's validated. So we're at this 34 billion and change number right now, and 74.5% of that is staked. If you take that number and you times it by 0.745, and then you multiply that by the current price of 0.3504, you get 8,939,776,523 worth of ADA currently staked. If we come over here to DeFi Llama, you can see the top protocol by total value locked is in fact Lido, and Lido only has 7.64 billion locked in it, less than the 8.9 billion that are participating in Cardano staking right now. Of course, the consistent retort to that is going to be that Lido is basically just a dApp, just a protocol and a platform running in Ethereum, while what we're talking about on the Cardano side is actual base layer staking going on. But I think Ada Well makes a good point about what the distinguishing factor should be here. And we're talking about DeFi applications. So we are talking about decentralized finance applications. And in the case of Lido, the project that only has 7.9 billion locked in it, it's actually a centralized financial custodian that's doing staking derivatives. In the case of Cardano staking, you've actually got a decentralized non-custodial staking protocol. Non-custodial from the perspective of the protocol. The users retain custody, which is the exact opposite of what happens with Lido. So you have to ask the question, if we're talking about a decentralized finance application, which one of those two is more decentralized? Definitely, it's the Cardano base layer staking. And it's also a good point that Cardano's achieving this at the base layer, while in Ethereum, they have to do it through an app to achieve any kind of liquid staking, and it's not even liquidity in your actual ether. It's liquidity in a derivative that you have to rely on Lido to provide. It's just like Bitcoin 10 years ago. Of course, people in Ethereum staking, the people providing the 7.9 billion to Lido, of course they're going to be sleeping on Cardano staking. They probably don't even realize that non-custodial staking could be a thing, let alone at the base layer. You can see from these rankings that the Ethereum world and all of the rest of the DeFi that looks a lot like Ethereum celebrates total value locked. But crypto, at least originally, was all about decentralization. And to me, the locking of your assets in a third party platform is more of an anti consumer form of centralization. I mean, by definition, it's sort of centralization of a bunch of decentralized users' assets in one centralized smart contract. I mean, I'm using the word centralized in the sense that it's one smart contract. You can argue that a smart contract can be a decentralized thing, but you're taking a bunch of individual users' assets and centralizing them all in one spot that can make them a very attractive reward pot for hackers and other inhabitants of the robbery forest. So you are sent, even if we want to say that smart contracts can be decentralized sort of instruments, decentralized, things. You are centralizing a bunch of assets in one spot so that a much greater number of people can all simultaneously be victims of the robbery forest and other things like that. I personally think of that as kind of an anti consumer form of centralization. I personally hope we never have a high TVL in Cardano. I would much rather have metrics like total value decentralized, like I described in Cardano Rumor Rundown number 294. I would much rather think about how we can measure things in terms of how decentralized they are, because total value locked to me is more of a metric of centralization. Even if you say that the smart contract itself is kind of a decentralized mechanism, you are centralizing a bunch of assets in one spot. So, why is it that the Ethereum world is so comfortable with this locking phenomenon, which is obviously a form of centralization? It's because they never could have imagined true native assets like we have in Cardano. We have actual native assets in Cardano that are first class citizens of our base layer blockchain. You don't have that in Ethereum. In Ethereum, tokens other than Ether, they are born out of smart contracts from birth. They're beholden to a smart contract. They're not native assets. And so, because they were never native assets, it's not that big a stretch to think about redepositing them, relocking them in some smart contract. Stake with Pride makes a good point about this here in the context of stablecoins. Cardano stablecoins like JED, USDA, IUSD are native assets, so you have full custody and they can't be frozen. Ethereum, Polygon, EVM, USDT, and USDC Solidity contracts can freeze your funds and zero out your balance. How is this different than a CBDC? And this is true. This is actually a criticism that people are using of crypto generally because they don't know that there is such a thing as native assets on a blockchain like Cardano. They think that all tokens are sort of beholden to whatever code is put into the smart contract. And here's a great screenshot showing, the kinds of code that could be involved in these kind of tokens that makes it very much like a CBDC. You see things like, Boolean, is the public address blacklisted? Is this an evil user on the blacklist? And then finally, this function down here, destroy black funds. This is exactly the problem with not having native assets, assets that are confiscation resistant, just like Bitcoin, just like ADA, just like Cardano native assets. If you don't have that, then you've got developers who can sort of upgrade the smart contract underlying the protocol at any time. If a regulator comes along and they can inject code just like this that takes a blockchain from being censorship resistant to not just censorship non-resistant, but censorship compliant, actually a tool of censorship, which, honestly, I think Stick with Pride has a very good point. It's not that much different than a CBDC. But just like non-crypto people a decade ago couldn't understand the utility of Bitcoin because they couldn't imagine a world where you could have a hard money that wasn't manipulable by central banks, people in Ethereum can't imagine native assets because this isn't anything that was ever possible in the Ethereum world. Here's another good point from Well. Ironically, if all DeFi front ends and custodians were taken down on SEC orders tomorrow, Cardano's staking, in which there are 8.9 billion in user assets, would be the only major DeFi app to survive and remain easily interactable with by the average person because its standard wallet is a full node and staking is non-custodial. This is a really big distinguishing factor between almost all of DeFi and what we've got going on with Cardano staking. Because with almost all of DeFi, you have very centralized front ends, usually websites. They're usually just websites, which means they're centralized on some server somewhere. Very easy for the SEC or the CFTC to take their regulatory hammer and crush that. They can very easily shut down those servers. This is pretty different than what Cardano's got going on because we've got dataless. It's a full node wallet. You can just run it locally on your machine and you can interact with the blockchain. That's not the case for most of DeFi. And also the staking is non-custodial. So you're not actually depositing your assets with anybody. In a lot of DeFi, you're using centralized front ends, which are easy to shut down, and you're depositing your assets somewhere with someone, which also is something that regulators focus on very heavily. Neither of those two things exists in Cardano. It's a lot more like Bitcoin. The reason no regulator could ever shut down Bitcoin was because people were just running full node wallets locally. They were mining. There were no servers out there, no centralized servers. Satoshi didn't have like the Satoshi centralized Bitcoin servers. There wasn't really anything for the regulators to target. And that's kind of how Cardano staking works. We've got a full node wallet and staking is non-custodial. This is, not on accident. This is very intentional thing. It mirrors the way Bitcoin was laid out. And that would be a huge advantage if the SEC were actually going after DeFi. And I don't think that's something that would happen, sort of overnight. Obviously, AdaWell is just laying out a hypothetical situation here to emphasize the point. But what we do know is that SEC investigations tend to take something like 18 months. And if you watch this channel, about 15 months ago, you'll remember that one of the biggest, most well known, most famous DeFi applications in all of the Ethereum world was actually, at least we first discovered it was under investigation about 15 months ago. Back in September of 2021, we discussed on this channel how Uniswap Labs, the lab entity behind the Uniswap protocol, was being investigated by the SEC according to news headlines just like this one. This article from Reuters says, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission is investigating Uniswap Labs, the main developer behind one of the world's largest cryptocurrency exchanges. This was all initially reported in the Wall Street Journal. Enforcement attorneys are looking for more information on how investors use Uniswap and the manner in which it is marketed. So you'll remember the aftermath of this was that Uniswap immediately removed the synthetic assets from the Uniswap front end that Uniswap Labs runs. So synthetics weren't removed from the protocol, and there were other front ends run by entities other than Uniswap Labs for the protocol. So Uniswap Labs, they just controlled their front end, and they had long ago already deployed the protocol to the blockchain. So they removed synthetic assets from their front end. Other front ends didn't necessarily remove synthetics, and the protocol, of course, is already deployed, and it's permissionless in some ways, so they can't really prevent synthetics from being on the protocol. But this was September of 2021, which means we're now, getting close. In the next few months here, we will have gotten to the end of that 18-month timeline, which is usually about how long SEC investigations like this, last roughly. So it wouldn't be a shocker if we see some kind of continued movement on this SEC, sort of SEC investigation of Uniswap. It could be that the SEC has, a bunch of investigations like this that have been in motion for, 18 months or so, ending sometime in 2023. So while it's kind of a hypothetical, what if the SEC, came down on all of DeFi tomorrow? It could be that the SEC really came down on DeFi about a year and a half ago, and we could see some very, very high profile announcements about some high profile DeFi dApps this year in 2023. Next up, we have a sad but important security reminder. This is an Ethereum NFT personality who had a bunch of Ether and a bunch of NFTs. He says, a month ago, I bought my dream computer, a top of the line desktop that will be able to handle all the video editing and gaming I throw at it. I go to set up my ledger with it and I make a critical mistake. I set it up as a hot wallet instead of a cold wallet. Critical mistake indeed. Now I'm highly technical, but after not setting up a ledger for 2 years, I screwed up. I entered my seed phrase in a way that no longer kept it cold. I knew I made a critical mistake. To this point, I haven't bought an NFT for months and wasn't planning on doing it anytime soon. So here's the deal. I'll spare you all the gory details, but he ended up downloading some malicious software. And of course, the point of the software was to check to see if you had any private keys, any seed phrases on your local device. And when he says, I entered my seed phrase in a way that no longer kept it cold, you know that what happened was his seed phrase was input into this top of the line desktop. So hardware wallets, probably a must have. If you have an amount of crypto you would be sad to lose, you should probably have a hardware wallet. I have an affiliate link for ledgers down below in the description box. I get a small commission if you buy a ledger through that link. It doesn't have to be a ledger, but you should get some kind of a hardware wallet, some kind of a reliable, legit hardware wallet. If you have an amount of crypto you'd be sad to lose, don't buy it from any kind of secondhand seller. Don't buy it on eBay. Don't buy it from anybody else other than the manufacturer. Just buy it directly from the manufacturer, so you can be sure that somebody didn't tamper with it, or collect the seed phrase from the device before you get it. Anything crazy like that. Second of all, when you use a hardware wallet, the whole point is that the hardware wallet produces the seed phrase, the private keys, and it's going to display that on the little screen. And then you're going to write it on a piece of paper. You're going to write that seed phrase on a piece of paper. And hopefully you'll also scrawl or engrave that into a piece of steel. You can buy pretty cheap little seed phrase kits, so you can scratch your seed phrase into a piece of steel. That way, if there's any kind of a house fire or a flood at the location where you're keeping this, you'll have it on steel. Hopefully it'll be safe compared to the paper, which could burn up, or if water hits it, could run the ink, that kind of thing. But the one thing you can't do, remember, the whole point of the hardware wallet is to keep your seed phrase, your private keys, off any device that might ever be connected to the internet. So what you cannot do is then take your seed phrase and enter it in your computer, which is obviously what happened here. He says, I entered my seed phrase in a way that no longer kept it cold. By that, he means, I'm pretty sure he entered it in his top of the line desktop, which totally defeats the purpose of the hardware wallet. If your seed phrase is on your local device, then you can lose that seed phrase just as easily as if you had a regular software wallet. So if you use a hardware wallet, which you probably should if you have any amount of crypto you care about, make sure you don't enter your seed phrase into your computer at any time for any reason. Finally, some news out of a DeFi project proper on Cardano. MuesliSwap says, our concentrated liquidity pool smart contracts have passed their audit. Exciting things to come as we gear up for mainnet launch. And when they say exciting things, they have a little follow-up tweet here. With our concentrated liquidity pools launching, we're bringing a host of new features to Cardano. Get ready for our very own stablecoin swap and more. I hope you had a great weekend, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.